Hi everyone, and welcome to this mini masterclass session about navigating through the many challenges of SCA strong customer authentication. Our goal with this session of about 20 minutes, and we have a breakout after that, is to actually help all stakeholders of payment service providers understand the many challenges that they're going to face when they engage into an SCA project to make the right decision and, of course, plan ahead accordingly. The many insights that we are going to share today in this session come from the many discussions that we have with a lot of players in this industry, e-wallet providers, remittances, and of course, a lot of different issuers, be they banks, EMIs, processors, and even banking as a service providers. It's important that you as an issuer succeed in this project because there's a massive shift in liability coming from PSD to RTS. So basically issuers are responsible for nearly everything. And the second thing is that there's a second deadline coming up with SCA in the UK in September with e-commerce SCA. So that's important that you have a 360 view of the challenges facing you. And of course, this is a subject that is rather complex and with a lot of ramifications. So we took the liberty to call in some of our partners to shed light on some particular aspects of SCA. So I am Fabien Ignacolo. I'm the CEO of OK. We are a strong customer authentication vendor based in Norway. And to help me go through all these topics, we have Erik Vassosen, our CTO. And well, bear with us. We're starting now.
Thank you, Fabian. I'm a CTO, but the topics we will review today are not technical at all. They're just highlighting some challenges or even pitfalls we and our customers face when engaging into compliance projects. This type of project can be complicated, the halfway between technology and compliance, with many topics to take care of. As a technology provider and software vendor, our experience is that it is often the non-technical challenges that is the hardest to solve. As there might be legacy systems, customers without smartphones, complicated integrations with multiple vendors, and everything having to fit into sometimes complicated compliance requirements. And back to you, Fabian.
Thank you, Erik. So with no further ado, let's start with the first challenge. Reaching SCA compliance. So SCA is just one aspect of PSD2 and the RTS, the regulatory technical standards. There are many things that you as an issuer need to take care of. So there's, of course, SCA itself, but you have to understand the liability, as I was saying in the introduction, to which extent you are liable with fraud. You have to understand all the exemptions when it comes to payment, and for instance, transaction risk analysis in particular, which is an important and a complex topic. So you have many things to take care of, right down to audits, of course, and evaluation by third parties of the solutions that you have put in place and the processes. So navigating, of course, is complex. And SCA itself, we have two flavors, if I may say so, captures with two deadlines in the UK. One, of course, was last year with e-banking and open banking SCA. And we have another one coming up in September this year in the UK with e-commerce SCA. And both SCAs have their own specific challenges, especially when it comes to integration. So you've understood that this is a complex topic. It's complicated to navigate through all this knowledge. And we have here one of our partners, Mike Doyle, from the consultancy Recognex, shed light on the complexity of the regulatory framework. Mike, yours.
We all know that one of the key challenges with any piece of regulation is to try and faithfully interpret the spirit of the regulation. And this has definitely been the case with the regulatory technical standards. So the standards were deliberately kept technology agnostic to begin with in order that they didn't break people's business models. And what we've seen in the 3 years since the standards were finalised is a huge amount of questions raised by industry around their attempts to try and understand the standards. And in response now, what we have is a wide variety of information sources which you'll need to work through and you'll need to understand in order to arrive at that level where you can faithfully interpret the standards. So there are opinion papers, there are guidelines, there are API profiles, and you're going to need to work through all of those to get to the promised land.
Thank you, Mike. So let's move on to the second challenge, the choice of factors. Now, as you know, it's important that you have the right combination of factors when it comes to the authentication, because this has a real impact on the user experience when authenticating. You might have seen this diagram a lot in the past few years. And of course, you have to choose two methods of authentication amongst these three factors. The first is the knowledge factor, with something I know. It can be a secret PIN, a one-time password, a secret question, etc. Second one is something we own, is the possession factor, a smartphone, it can be a token, a dongle, and so on. And the third one is inherence, the inherence factor. So this is something I am. So it can be down to the realm of biometrics with face recognition, fingerprint recognition, iris recognition, and so forth. Now, at OK, we believe that the app-based authentication is the best experience that you as issuers can provide to your end users when you use, of course, app-based authentication as opposed to OTP by SMS alone, as it's been done up to now. But of course, there are conditions to be met in the choice of the different factors. And also there is a hierarchy in frictionlessness, if I may say so, for the second factor. So what we've put together here is that we think, first, the possession factor should be a smartphone, because this is the most used devices amongst us users. And on this smartphone, you would have a banking app, and the banking app would be integrating security mechanisms that OK provide. So that's the first factor. Then when you actually authenticate, you have a second factor, the stepped-up authentication. And here there's a hierarchy for this second factor. And the best frictionless authentication method is, of course, biometrics, because this is something that's we're used to as users. That's the biometric capability embedded in smartphone. Then comes the secret PIN, the knowledge factor. So that's the secret PIN that you would be entering into a banking app on your smartphone. Then comes the one-time password provided by an app. Then the one-time password provided by SMS, plus something else. It can be a password or something else, and we'll come back to this in a second. Then comes remote dial, automated callback to authenticate you. And of course, right at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the credentials, passwords, and that everybody forgets. So if you have smartphone on one hand for the possession factor and biometrics on the other hand, you can have a rather fluid and as frictionless as can be flow when actually authenticating yourself. So here I am on a mobile phone on this e-merchant buying an armchair, and I'm entering my credit card details. Of course, when I do that, the access control server of my bank, the issuer, is going to challenge me with strong customer authentication. So I have to authenticate, and I receive immediately on my phone a push notification, requiring that I authenticate myself. This is the push notification is important. Everybody's used to receiving push notifications on their mobile phone. So I received this authentication request, which prompts me when I click on it to this interface. This is the transaction with the information that I need to validate. So the amount and the name of the merchant. And of course, all of this is secured in the background with transparent security so that I am sure to really look at the genuine information. This is a genuine transaction I'm going to validate. The service recognizes that I actually use Face ID on an iPhone, so it's going to prompt me to use that. And I have authorized it previously. I'm authenticating, and the purchase is completed. So as we see, this is as frictionless as can be when we choose the right factors. So now let's move to OTP by SMS, Eric. We want to zoom in on this very particular thing, and there's a lot of debate on OTP by SMS in the UK.
Yeah, thank you, Fabian. So one of the big challenges facing many incumbent banks and issuers today is that they rely on OTP by SMS for authentication. As Fabian mentioned earlier, you are required to have 2 of the 3 factors for SCA. This means that an SMS can be used to verify the possession factor, as the phone number is linked to the SIM card owned by the user. In addition to the possession factor, the user then has to remember as a password or secret code, which can be the second knowledge element. The problem here is that SMS messages are an easy target for malware, which only leaves a password to protect the security of an account. This is a particularly big problem with banking apps, as the attacker then only has to attack a single device. Text messages are easy to steal, and then you only have to trick the user into entering the password to get access to their account. For a truly strong customer authentication, we need to do better than this. A second issue is down to cost. The cost of OTP by SMS varies with usage, which can be quite costly in some markets. With app-based solutions, the authentication can take place out of band from the banking app in a secure execution environment, and the cost can be dramatically lower as well. I think that's back to you, Fabian.
Yes, thank you. And we had a provocative title, Life and Death of OTP by SMS. We've seen deployment of app-based authentication in mainland Europe. And of course, you don't mix well in terms of user experience between OTP by SMS and app-based authentication. So we see a sharp decline in the OTP by SMS. So, which prompts us to the following challenge, the specific SCA cases. Now, whenever you engage into an SCA project, you're going to actually have to face several specific use cases. First of all, the corporate payments. Corporate payments can be an exemption from PSD2 RTS. And the users here don't really use smartphones, so you have to authenticate them on a PC. However, you have to have proper security in place to protect the transactions in the corporate payment world. The second case are non-smartphone users and more generally accessibility. Of course, you have non-smartphone users, you have non-app users. So we had to design a way to be able to authenticate this fringe of the user base, which can be quite important, up to 20 to 30% for large incumbent banks. So we came up with this remote dial that you see, that you saw in the pyramid of authentication methods. It's a bit of friction, but it's compliant to PSD2 SCA, and basically the users receive an automated call with the details of the transaction and a one-time password that they have to enter into a web browser, be it on their PC or phone. Now, obviously, when you do that, you make a call to a smartphone or to a non-smartphone or even to a landline, which is rather safe. But if you do to smartphone and to non-smartphones, then you have to make sure that, of course, this is the right smartphone. You have this question of trust between the user and their devices. And of course, there could have been a swim swap attack or a redirection. You have to prevent that. So how to ensure the trust between the user and the devices? It's an important question. And of course, this is a question that you're going to ask yourselves at the enrollment and re-enrollment phases of users to your banking services. And of course, these are very critical stages in terms of security. So there's no one solution that fits all. We actually rely on partners to help us on some very specific cases. And we have Stuart Neal from Boku explaining how they can help make sure that there is trust between the user and the devices in these very different cases. Stuart.
Thanks, Fabian. It's a pleasure to be here. Boku is a proud partner of OK. And Boku provides an aggregated service that basically partners with some of the world's biggest mobile phone operators in order to use those valuable signals that the mobile phone companies can bring to verify a user, whether that's a user within an app ecosystem or a user, frankly, they still exist, a user that is not using the app ecosystem. So we have a nice partnership with OK whereby they're using our SIM detection capabilities in order to verify users who are dialing in to verify themselves. So there's still quite a big proportion of your customers who will need to dial in rather than using their smartphone. And we cater for this. So providing a multi-factor authentication product across all channels is still incredibly important.
Thank you, Stuart. So let's move on. We've talked a lot about the challenges around the factors and the use cases. And now let's dive into the strong security challenge. Eric.
Yeah. So what does it take to have truly strong security in an app? Today, more and more payments are done through a single device. The smartphone is a single device where everything takes place, where the payment is initiated and where the customer is authenticated and the transaction is verified. This makes it very important to protect the authentication factors. One aspect that is important to remember is that it's not enough to verify just the possession of the device and the biometric of the customer. You also have to make sure that what the user is seeing is what the user is supposed to see. If the user is tricked into verifying a fraudulent transaction by perhaps malware modifying what the user is seeing, you're still liable, even if the customer authentication was otherwise done properly. Another thing to keep in mind is that security has to be forward-looking. It can be a matter of hours or days between a security vulnerability becoming public and the vulnerability being used on tens of thousands of devices. This can be a big worry if you're liable for fraud. In practice, this means that the security has to be a key feature in your banking app, and that you have to be ready to face the next unknown attacks as well. So malware are currently the most innovative form of attack that we are seeing today. However, you cannot deal with malware the same way you can do on PCs. You cannot track virus signatures as you have as a PC haven't got access to files in the same way that you have got on a PC. Protecting the entire application is one option, but there is often a balancing act between fast implementation on one side and new features with high security on the other side. One way of solving the security requirements is to focus on the authentication process and detect an attempt of tampering with the transaction or authentication. And if something is found, raise alarm. Another challenge is mass attacks, where thousands of customers are targeted. In an example from last December, 16,000 customer phones at a major bank were infected with malware, probably from a targeted phishing attack. The malware stole the user's credentials, then text messages sent with OTP codes to the device. This allowed the attacker to automate running the banking app in an emulator, where they could impersonate the user, initiate transactions, and so on. But if it is thousands of customers transferring money to and from each other, and then before the money ends up in a small bank abroad through SEPA instant payments, this can be a real struggle for a bank. Besides strong device checks and avoiding text messages, one way of avoiding this type of attack is to make the secure execution environments unique, so that this is harder to target thousands of devices at the same time. And besides the threat of malware, another challenge that PSPs and issues have to deal with is what to do with devices running older operating systems. About half to 2/3 of Android devices in use won't get updates from the manufacturer. Companies like Google and Samsung are pretty good, with around 3 years of support from the devices launched. But the phones you can buy for $30 on AliExpress or in a cheap store somewhere, they probably won't get that kind of support. There are critical issues such as remote exploitable security vulnerabilities released every couple of weeks, and local privilege escalation vulnerabilities that can give an attacker root access. So using a device that don't get security updates can be a real problem, both for the end user, but also for the PSPs and banks. As a result, we have already seen some banks that are denying transactions from older devices. So if you try to make a payment from an old device, you won't simply be able to. The situation is a bit better on iOS, with devices as old as the iPhone 5S can get critical updates from Apple. But the reality is that in many markets, a large percentage of users have old and cheap devices, often even without a fingerprint reader. This makes the security of the SCA process even more important, as the reality is that many customers are using smartphones with the security level of a computer running Windows XP. And back to you, Fabian.
Thank you, Eric. So quite a few security challenges around, the security itself, the threats, the operating system headache, and last but not least, we have to touch the integration questions, of course. Now, whenever we are talking about integration with an SCA project, there are two aspects of integration. There's the backend integration, and here I think whatever the scenario, I'll talk about it in a second, is really all about being part of a value chain or an integrated ecosystem, if you will. So there are two integration aspects to take into account. There's one with e-banking and open banking strong customer authentication. And here, most of the work will take place around identity and access management and the rules and the workflows, know your customer, etc. How you can authenticate them. For this, we have Kanan Rasapan from Bankfico, open banking solution, shedding light on the partnership we have in the open banking world and how we try to make the life of issuers as simple as possible when it comes to both open banking and SCA. Kanan, please.
Thank you, Fabian. Open banking itself is already complex, and we have seen a lot of banks struggling, and many of them did not address strong customer authentication comprehensively. Major problem in this is the fragmented IT landscape within the bank in customer identity, their own existing authentication for different channels, and the new multi-factor authentication. All this needs to be kind of put together to make it strong customer authentication compliant. And with these, we have a lot of delivery risk because of the integration with different solution and vendors. With an ecosystem of prefabricated or pre-integrated best-of-breed solution, partners like OK and Bankfico are able to go to the banks and give them a very good solution that meets the SCA compliance within the timeline they have, and also within the budget.
Thank you, Kanan. So the second aspect of the backend integration is related to e-commerce strong customer authentication. Here, the backend integration really is around the access control server of the issuer of the processor and around 3D Secure. Here we have another testimony from Simeon Miles from FSS Technologies, and explaining why a large technology vendor in the payment space as FSS and a large processor formed a partnership with us. OK.
Fabian. Yeah, for FSS, this partnership with OK was really very much a no-brainer. Our customers and clients are looking for a very fast, deployable solution that takes low risk. And this is exactly what this gives us. It gives our customers very quick speed to market. And so it's absolutely essential that we have something pre-integrated, which is exactly what we've got with OK being within our FSS ecosystem as a processor and as an ACS supplier as well. Second to that also is the user experience. So in a mobile first world, our clients are looking for the best possible user experience for their consumers. They're thinking the only thing that they want for their clients to see is the best possible user experience linked to their brand. And again, the FSS OK partnership enables that and goes beyond that as well with a third really crucial bit, which is the additional security that it gives to their consumers. With 2/3 of possible on Android phones being vulnerable, this gives them an added layer of security in protecting that transaction.
Thank you, Simon. The last bit of integration to take care of is the front-end integration, of course, because you have to have this app-based authentication ready. You have to integrate security mechanisms into the banking app, and you as issuers have to solve a bit of a conundrum here: the equation between the balance of user experience and interface and the security. So here it's all about having the proper security mechanisms in the app so that your service is compliant and you are compliant. And at the same time, you have to blend in at the moment of authentication into the user interface and the user experience that you have invested in massively. So we have found a way to actually solve this. And so we are able to solve the equation, having both the security and 100% matching UI for the authentication part, and able to roll this out, in 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the complexity of the layouts for the authentication scenarios. So now we've completed the challenges. There was a lot of content here and a lot of topics, of course, to take care of in a very short time. We have a breakout session just after this presentation with Q&A, so we hope to see you there with Eric to answer all of your questions, and we might have also our partners there for extended topics. Thank you.